Hey, everybody, it's Larry Kotlikoff. Welcome back to Economics Matters, the podcast. I'm delighted to have two terrific guests today to talk about the retirement financing or financial crisis, the crisis that so many uh, baby boomers and older generations are facing, getting through retirements, which are for many people much longer than expected for two reasons. One is they're living longer than expected, and they're also retiring earlier than they had hoped for. A lot of people are saying they're going to retire, not retire in their 70. But the reality is that people do retire very early. And even though there's been a turnaround in the age of retirement a bit in terms of labor force participation numbers, uh, you don't see a very significant turnaround in the last 10 or so years in that behavior. So working longer, at least, is not really a big deal economically at the moment. So we have to talk about some other issues, and we can't have two better guests to talk about this. Kathleen Townsend, Kennedy, and Arun Muralidhar are true experts in this area and a whole bunch of other areas. So let me start with Kathleen's bio, which fortunately and unfortunately goes
Oh,
on from.
I can say it very quickly. I'm the first female lieutenant governor of the state of Maryland, and I've been working on retirement reform for the last 10 years.
Yeah, but I mean,
I would leave it at that. I
you
think
don't,
that's
you don't want to talk about working for the Secretary of State and all your being on different
no, because
boards.
it's not relevant to what I'm doing now.
Okay, Harvard degree, nothing like that. Okay, we leave that. Arun, do you have a short summary too?
Yeah, actually, pretty simple. I used to work at the World Bank managing their pension fund, actually 26 years to the day, literally to the day. And I even have a picture to prove it. I got into a huge fight at the World Bank as they were trying to privatize Social Security, and this was at a conference in Beijing. And so for the last 26 years, I've been fighting relatively unsuccessfully to try to make sure people get a decent retirement income. So very much like Kathleen, just a fortuitous thing that I was in the middle of a nice conference in China with the World Bank, and I was the technocrat, and all of a sudden I realized what they were prescribing for the world was nonsense. And
Yeah,
as a good student of Franco Modigliani, I could keep my mouth shut. So uh,
I'm with you. I actually ran for Jeff Sachs. I was running in the summer kind of a summer workshop pension reform. We had it was me and people from the World Bank, and we had people from all over the world, like 15 people every summer for like, I don't know, a couple, maybe 15 years.
yeah.
And it was a constant fight because they wanted to privatize in a way that was going to enrich the financial sector, follow the Chilean model. And we've been on the same side on that one. And so I was a close friend of Franco's, although we disagreed on a lot of things. But anyway, our tracks brought us together, and now I've got to meet Kathleen in this context. So I'm delighted. Let me start out by asking you, Kathleen, to kind of give an overview of your sense of how, do we have a retirement crisis for boomers and for older Americans? Do we have, is that part of our bigger kind of inequality crisis and social welfare crisis in the country? You've had, experience in government, out of government, looking at this, and you're very much involved in the retirement sphere. So give us your kind of picture, and don't feel like you need to do it in 2 seconds. I mean, we have time. Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, yes, we do have a retirement crisis. Thank you for asking. And I think one big reason we have a retirement crisis is because half of all businesses don't offer a retirement plan. And most of these businesses don't offer a retirement plan because they're small. And it's expensive to offer a retirement plan, and so they don't do it. That's, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we face. And if you look at the statistics, Gallup has found that retirement is the number one problem that Americans face. That they think it's more important than health. They think it's more important than finding a job. And the reason that they don't talk about it is because they feel guilty. They feel it is their fault that they don't have enough money saved for retirement. And I compare it often to how people felt about domestic abuse 40 years ago. If a woman was beaten up by her husband, she thought, this is my fault. She didn't blame somebody else. And so right now, for instance, healthcare, if we don't have a good healthcare system, we think it's the system's fault. We don't blame ourselves. But with retirement, the opposite occurs. People blame themselves. And I think that comes in large part because if you look at the advertisements on television, the ads keep saying, we will help you solve your problems with retirement. So you keep hearing these messages that it is your decisions that give you a good retirement, not the system, not the fact that you don't have, your employer does not provide a good retirement, not that the government has not set up a system that makes it easy to retire, to save. So that's why we, number one, have a retirement crisis. And two, we haven't really gotten the political will to solve it, because even though people know in their hearts it's the number one thing they're worried about, they can't get politically involved because they don't want to even use the word retirement. It puts them in a fetal position.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. I would have said pretty similar things. I think one thing to add is that for poor people, people like in the lowest 20% of the income distribution, I think only 10% have any retirement plan, period. That maybe because,
You could say that, but even at almost all levels, except for the very wealthy, because we now have a 401k system, that is a system that provides you money when you do retire, because you don't know when you're going to die. I laugh about that. You don't know when you die. You don't know how to spend that money. And that causes, you're nervous about how much you're going to spend, and that causes cognitive decline. So the point is, even for people who are well off, they too are worried about retirement, even though they have. So you've got, just as you say, the lower 20% clearly have challenges. In fact, the homeless situation is that the largest percentage of people who are homeless are the elderly. I've worked on homelessness now since 1982.
that's shocking statistic. That's a shocking fact. I never knew that. The largest
percentage. So it used to be, when I worked on homelessness in 1982, the people who were usually homeless were mentally ill, not necessarily old. People were alcoholic, addict, or people who were abused by their spouse or their boyfriend, whatever. But now it's people who are elderly because they don't have enough funds to be able to live in a home. So this is a totally different situation than we faced 40 years ago.
Right. And it is across. Yeah, I was just going to add that even among the people that are better off, middle and upper middle class, the rich, we kind of should be able to take care of themselves. But a lot of those that are in retirement plans are not contributing very substantially, or contributing maybe half of what they might. You're not even participating at all. Arun, give us your general take about the overall picture.
So I'll take a step back because, I came into this managing a Pillar 2 pension fund. So I was managing the World Bank's pension fund in the mid 1990s. Then I got into this huge debate with the World Bank about, social security crises around the world, which led to about a 15-year fight with Franco to try to get people to listen to what we were suggesting, because all we said is it's not a problem about DB versus DC. It's a funding problem. And if they solve that, actually, funnily enough, I looked at our numbers from our recommendation in 1998. If the Social Security had followed that, we could have maintained our DB with a very marginal sort of cost increase and totally stable, as opposed to something going belly up, by 2032, meaning the trust fund is gone. So we have a problem with the first.
Can I just make a suggestion that you define what you mean by DB and DC? Because we're all retirement or experts, but it's not clear that every listener
Actually, good point.
knows what those terms mean.
So the way I would define benefit is you have a guaranteed income stream till retirement, and essentially you contribute into a system, but you make no decisions, and the sponsor, based on a bunch of people on the board, make sure that you get paid out, and you have protection either from the employer or from the state sponsor or the PBGC in the case of the US.
So it's a pension, a defined.
It's a pension.
So
Yes.
I think we could use the word pension. I think that might be a better word to use.
Defined contribution is where you're turning over all the decisions and the risk to the individual who's completely financially incompetent, myself included. My 401k is a disaster. And we're asking people to make these extremely complicated decisions about how much to save, how to invest, how to rebalance, and then how to decumulate, along with all the other things they have to do. So moving from DB to DC, which has happened because each of the pillars has crumbled, both the DB and Social Security are in big trouble. We've now gone pretty much to all DC for the younger generations, and it's not going to end well, given what we have out there with respect to not only the contribution side, but the investment products are garbage, right? In fact, I was reading a beautiful story. Actually, it's a story that Feynman tells in a convocation ceremony, Richard Feynman, the great physicist. And it's about the cargo cult, right? It's this group of people living in the South Seas, and they were so used to, during the war, having these plane lands and getting all the goodies, that after the planes left, they erect a whole airport and, have people sitting with headphones waiting for the planes to land. And this is what we have with our DC today, right? It's literally people hoping for something to happen with nonsense going on. And so we have to call it out and we have to make changes. So that's how I met Kathleen 10 years ago, actually, probably to the date. And you can see how persuasive she was, because I had said, forget it, I'm never working on pension reform again, having been completely unsuccessful with Franco for 15 years. And so she said, no, you're not allowed to do that. And here I am back in the fray. So I owe it to Kathleen to have brought me back in. And I wrote a book called 50 States of Grey, thanks to Kathleen as well. So
Yeah, you've both written books, and and your bios we're going to post on the podcast. Or maybe do you have a door that can clear? I think there's some noise in your hallway that's kind of reverberating. I don't know if that's possible to.
Let me see if I can. Is this a bit better? Sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you maybe another option would be to mute in between when you're talking. That would be good. So let me ask you. I mean, one comment as an economist who studies Social Security and fiscal policy in general is that if you go to young people and say, well, look, we're going to take a very large fraction of your wages and give them to your parents, and then don't worry about that, because when you're old, we're going to let you do the same thing to your kids, and then your kids will have the opportunity to take from their kids, and that'll all work out. And of course, if there's not enough kids, if you haven't had enough kids, or if the kids don't earn enough, their wages don't grow like one would like, maybe you'll just take about a bigger share of their wages, and we'll let this keep going until things all fall apart. That's kind of like the way we started Social Security and this really is under Democratic and Republican regimes. I mean,
let me say, this is not really fair. The Democrats actually wanted to fully fund Social Security, and the Republicans did not want to fund it. So I think it's not fair to say this is under both regimes. There was a fight when Franklin Roosevelt started Social Security, and he wanted to fully fund it, and the Republicans did not want to fully fund it.
Okay, I wasn't saying so much about Roosevelt, which okay,
but I want to defend Franklin Roosevelt right here on this program. I want to make sure
That's good to hear.
that he really
Good to
did.
hear.
He really did fully fund it, and there were others that did not want to fund it. And there's been a fight since the 40s. As you can see, I'm passionate about this, as I am about a number of things. And there's been a fight for many, many years as to whether we are going to fully fund Social Security. We could make it funded in a number of ways. We have I'm going to tell you a story, and your listeners, I'm going to interrupt you if you don't mind.
It's okay. Go ahead.
So I didn't realize that there was a cap on how much you pay in Social Security taxes, for instance. And how did I learn that there was a cap? After I was, as I told you, the lieutenant governor, I ran for governor, and the voters of Maryland unfortunately didn't do the right thing. So I started working for a financial firm. So for the first time in my life, I made more money than I had ever made before. And in about, I don't know, maybe it was September that year, or maybe it was July, I can't remember. I said, oh my gosh, what happened? My paycheck just increased. Why did my paycheck increase? And somebody said to me, well, Kathleen, if you make a certain amount of money, you don't have to pay Social Security anymore. And I said, you gotta be kidding me. I make more money and I pay fewer taxes. Now, right. I had run for Congress. I had been a lieutenant governor. I had worked for a number of members of my family who had run for office. And I didn't realize that when you make a certain amount more money, you don't have to pay the Social Security tax. This was news to me. And I assume it's news to a lot of Americans that the rich don't pay the same amount of taxes as those who make less money on their salary. And if you make money from your stocks and your bonds, you don't pay taxes on that at all for Social Security. So they're very well off, pay even less for Social Security. So there is a completely unfair way that we pay taxes for Social Security for our seniors. And I don't think a lot of Americans know that. My father, for instance, suggested that people should be taxed on stocks and bonds for Social Security. It was not fair that we just tax the working people for Social Security. That did not go over well, apparently, with members of the party. I'm just pointing this out because when you said it's Democrats and Republicans, there were some other ways to solve these problems if you had a fair tax system.
Yeah, and there's still are. Sure.
Larry, could I just provide a counterpoint? I rarely disagree with Kathleen because it doesn't end well for me, but I want to give the other side a fair shot only because they're probably not represented. I wrote a piece right after the Obama administration waived the 2% contributions to Social Security, and I titled it, Honey, I've Shrunk the Kids' Wealth, right? Because when you have a system that's going under, the Democrats actually stole contributions from Social Security, Kathleen, and that is something I'm really mad about. We actually had the attention of President Clinton to put the surpluses that they were running on the budget into Social Security. Never happened. Obviously, I'm clearly no fan of what the Bush administration was suggesting in terms of privatization. But I think the Democrats have enough egg on their face that they couldn't take the high road completely. And Kathleen, on the one point about your taxes maxing out, in a clean defined benefit, if you tax somebody with a higher income more, then you should pay them a higher pension. So if it's actually fair, if it's actually fair, that would normally be the case.
Let me just
but that's basically it. Right?
Let me just kind of give a broader picture as I'm trying and connect your views. First of all, we have had in the post-war period a huge redistribution from younger to future generations, an ongoing policy through all kinds of systems, including shifting the tax structure away, taxing less asset income, capital gains, and dividends, and shifting more the burden onto younger people, onto wages, but also cutting taxes, running deficits, also running off the book liabilities, Social Security, Medicare, but there's also other spending, like even defense, think about defense spending. It's an unfunded liability into the future. We have an obligation to protect the country. So we're not doing long-term fiscal gap analysis, what we in economics, or what we also call generational accounting, which I helped with, put together with a couple other colleagues to work on, to show that our whole system, going back decades now, that our whole system is on a collision course in terms of expropriating young and future generations to the benefit of current generations. So yeah, we could, and we also have inequality within a generation that's significant. And that's what Kathleen's speaking to, the fact that if you're Warren Buffett, you can just borrow, Warren will tell you this himself, he could borrow against his assets, spend as much as he wants, which in his case is not that much, but never have to pay a penny in taxes, and then leave his assets to his kids with a step up. So the billionaires are really super rich, can pay nothing, zero. So we have.
And as you know, when we were growing up, the tax rate was at 70%, and now it's much, much lower.
The effective tax rate, there were loopholes and ways to get around. So the effect. So I, as an economist, I don't want to see people in a 70% bracket. I want to make sure people have very good incentives to work at all. Right now, we have about 1,000 fiscal programs when you take into account the fact that every state has their own Medicaid, their own Section 8 housing, their own, or variants of, child care credits or child tax credits, or the negative income or the earned income tax credit. There's really 1,000 programs, none of which are coordinated. So that's one of the things I'm working on. Research.
Thank you. I'm glad you are.
Yeah.
And Larry, it's ended up
to show the entire
on the
picture,
pension side too, right? On the pension side, we're having the same issue, which is how Kathleen got involved, is because there was no action at the federal level. She started to talk to the states about trying to create their own little pension system, right? So everything is getting
little pension system. I think that diminishes what is going on in the state.
So let's do this. Let's talk about three things: selfies, and then Kathleen's. Maybe you could talk about selfies, which is this really cool, easily done innovation that Arun came up with association with Bob Merton, who's the finance whiz at MIT, Nobel laureate, a friend of both of ours, and the Isaac Newton of finance, according to Paul Samuelson when he was alive. And then Kathleen, maybe you could talk about selfies, about this proposal. What do you think of it? And then other things that you think should be done. And then, my view
should be done, have been done.
Have been done. Okay. Have been done, yeah, in Maryland, and are now spreading to other states, 18 so far. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about Social Security. And we'll talk about, each of your views and maybe my views as well about how to fix it. And then probably we won't have run out of time. So, Arun, tell us about selfies. What is this? What are selfies? And that Brazil has just adopted. I should say that Brazil has adopted this proposal. It's not just a pie in the sky. Brazil's a huge country, and it's there operating, just started, and then other countries are talking to Run and to Bob and about this idea. So take it away.
So it comes about again, thanks to Kathleen, right? I have to lay this at the foot of Kathleen because she called me up and said, we're trying to create these pension plans for uncovered workers. I didn't even know that existed. They're obviously going to have to be DC plans. And how do we make sure that we create a robust structure?
It's the defined contribution. You put your money with the employer. So, you contribute to a plan the employer sets up. That's defined contribution. He or she or they or whatever, define the contribution. You make the contribution. And then the question is, what happens to the money, which is where selfies comes in.
And that's the problem, right? Is, we were asking people who can't make basic calculations on compounding, inflation, accumulation, and decumulation to now own all those decisions. And it was a prescription for disaster. And I'd always been
Wall Street to do it because, it's very important to note that the companies that your company would hire to manage your pension system would be a Fidelity or a TI Graph or a Vanguard or T. Rowe Price. And all these companies are charging fees for your investments. So this is all coming at a cost. And then the return, of course, is not guaranteed if you're investing in the market. But also, they're also doing, came up with index funds, which are very inexpensive. So I don't want to overstate Wall Street greed or anything because, a
Yeah,
lot of what Wall Street has done has been very good. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but the previous.
I think that's I think that you can get much less, that you can invest with index funds, which are much.
But
Yeah, basically.
I think that's very important to say.
But my
Yeah.
problem with that is just because it's cheap doesn't make it a good product, right? And so back in 2007, a couple of the corporate pension fund CIOs that I was working with had created DC plans, and then they sent me the prospectus for target date funds. And the last chapter of my book that I wrote, I think after the tech crisis, after the great financial crisis, was called Off Target Date Funds, because essentially these idiotic, I'm going to call them idiotic products, shift your asset allocation from stocks to bonds just because you age. And that's become the default because the Department of Labor gave it qualified default investment status, right? And so people are being pushed into this product, which guarantees you neither a retirement wealth number nor a retirement income number. And so this really troubled me, but I didn't have any motivation to change it until Kathleen said, how do we design a plan for poor people who, can't afford to pay even the most basic fee, but still need a safe outcome?
Yep.
And I think at that time, MyRA had been launched by the Obama administration, and they were putting the monies in the G fund of the US Treasury, which is again just a guaranteed return, but it didn't guarantee.
My IRA.
MyRA. It was called MyRA. Okay. So Myra is what they called it, I guess. But interestingly enough, then I said, how do we get people a guaranteed real retirement income with the most basic effort, right? And funnily enough, it actually came from reading Franco's life cycle hypothesis paper and covering up the accumulation side and just looking at the line that he had, which was the chart for the decumulation. And what Franco was saying is we have to keep people on a steady consumption path throughout their life. But once they get past retirement, we have to keep that continuity going. And so the first question to me was, why can't we have a bond issue that has that cash flow? And full disclosure, my first job at the World Bank in 1992 was issuing bonds, including structured bonds. And so it was a no-brainer to say, why doesn't somebody issue this bond? Because then that becomes the safe asset in retirement. And I was reading a lot of Bob's earlier articles about the problems in DC funds, where he was arguing that the safe asset is not your T-bill or your TIPS instrument. And I said to Bob, you can't solve that problem with existing instruments. We have to create a new instrument, which then begs the question, who's the best person to issue it, right? So the way the bond exists today is the government of Brazil issues a bond. And for simplicity, I'll just convert it into dollar terms. And it pays you, let's say, $10 real per month for, let's say, 20 years, which is the average life expectancy of the country. And the reason we chose that is you can pick the start date of these cash flows. So you have a choice of your retirement date and the amount you would like to have in retirement. So let's say you decide you want $5,000 a month in real terms in retirement. Because each bond is paying you 10, you just have to buy 500 of these before you hit 65. No more math, right? So the Brazilian solution has been to have an app sold through Treasury Direct, where you enter your date of retirement and you enter your target amount, and it tells you how many bonds you have to buy, and it allows you to buy bonds in slices of as little as $5 at a time. So it's a genius invention. So through digitalization, they've actually created these selfies bonds.
But
for a whole of retirement.
In your and Bob's genius invention. It's not Brazil's genius invention. But let me just make it a little more clear, or add to the clarity. Okay. So today, if you can buy on the market, you can buy, let's say, a 20-year bond that pays out dollars. You put down so much dollars, you get back from the U.S. Treasury a stream of payments in dollars and a final principal payment in dollars. And if inflation has been high over this period, which is uncertain, you can be wiped out by inflation in terms of your the real value of that stream, the real purchasing power. You can be paid back in watered down dollars in effect. Now, the other option you have today is you could buy a 20-year Treasury inflation protected security called a TIP. These are called TIPS. They go for different maturities, but they go out to 30 years. But you buy a 20-year tip. And the difference would be is that the coupon payment would be adjusted yearly by the amount of inflation. So rather than, and now you would get less to begin with in dollars, but you would get whatever for the given payment. But whatever you got will be adjusted annually for inflation, and the final payoff will be adjusted. Now, what the selfies proposal is, SELFIES, it just sounds like selfies. It's written like selfies, is that your payment, there's no principal payment. It's just a 20-year payment, and it starts at a certain date. It doesn't have to start immediately. It can start at some date in the future. So you could be 30 and you could buy 20 years of selfies starting at 65, going from 65 to 85. You can put down some money today and know that you'll get this much real dollars in today in terms of how many cans of Campbell's soup you could buy. It's really, you can just think of it that when I say real, think about Campbell's soup for 20 years, starting from 65 to 85. And this way, if you do it through your retirement account fund, or you do it through, your check, buy it just through regular assets outside of a tax favored retirement account, you're still going to know that you're going to get this many cans of Campbell's soup for 20 years. And then you could buy some that would start at 70, go for 20 years, and some that start at 80. And this is a pretty easy thing for the US Treasury to do because I think it's pretty easy because first of all, they are issuing these things that have a stream that's inflation protected and a principal payment at the end. You could get rid of the principal payment. That's not a big deal. Now, the start date is a little different because it's selling something forward, but that's not, mechanically, the Treasury could do this overnight. And I'm hoping that people at the Treasury, who I know subscribe to this podcast, even though the subscription is, like, I should tell everybody, free. Anybody can just email me at kotlikov@gmail and get a free lifetime subscription to this podcast. I do occasionally ask for people to contribute, but if you don't, you don't. No big deal. But a lot of people from Treasury do subscribe, including some pretty high-level people, and they may decide, hey, we actually need to help people. This is obviously now. Kathleen, lean in on us here. Tell us what your role was in instigating this, and you're the basically the mother of selfies. It sounds like.
No, I'm not. This is Arun's idea, and I think it's terrific that Brazil has taken it up, and what he's doing is he's going around to different countries and saying why don't you do it? And he's tried to get it done in the United States. I think what you're doing is advertising it. Usually what happens is people act more in government the more that they're pushed, the more that the idea spreads. And that's what's so wonderful about what you're doing today, is making sure that other people hear about it. Because the more that people hear about it, feel comfortable with it, the more the likely it is to happen.
That's great. Now tell us, let's shift gears here and talk about
Larry, just one point.
One more,
because
okay, go ahead.
If I could just clarify, only because we have met with Treasury, actually once or twice, thanks to Kathleen, and then, I've done it with different administrations. So I'm agnostic to who issues it, whether it's Republican or Democrat, but it's a terrific deal for Treasury. In fact, when I first went to meet them, I was scared they'd want to issue this, in outrageous amounts, because every couple of months down in DC, we have this idiotic fight about, the budget caps, right? And just think about if you're the Treasury person and now you take coupons that you were paying, every month or every quarter, and now you don't have to repay it for 40 years. In fact, that would have been one of the easiest solutions for somebody in Treasury to say, my goodness, this solves one of the stupidest problems we have in DC. But more importantly, if you're trying to fund infrastructure, what better set of cash flows than the offset to this, right? So you're not only improving retirement security by giving people a guaranteed retirement income so that they don't end up poor and on the streets and then dependent on the government to bail them out, but you can fund infrastructure. Bob Merton had this brilliant idea that if you tie it to some index of a value-added tax or per capita consumption, then treasury is hedged because their cash flows in from tax revenue is linked to what you're paying out. So it's actually an
So
incredibly trivial deal.
that's an important thing, that the selfies aren't necessarily linked to, the payments not linked to inflation. It could be linked to living standards, right? The general
So the word
average consumption
selfies,
level,
yeah.
the
So the
average
word selfie
consumption.
stands for standard of living indexed,
Right, okay.
forward starting income only securities. And that was Bob's idea, gosh, 40 years ago, right? Is we should have pensions indexed to standard of living, not just inflation. And so
So
that's what
just to be
selfies.
clear, so if prices go up by 10% this year, your payment wouldn't go up by 10%, but if the average per capita spending went up by 11%, your payment would go up by 11%. So it's pegged to the nominal increase, percentage increase in per capita consumption, which we measure from our consumer expenditure survey annually. So I forgot that important feature. So that's an extra, important thing so we have this idea that's easy for the Treasury to implement. But one of the things you're pointing out in this comment is that if the Treasury sells these bonds, as we've described them, and now makes commitments to you to pay back starting when you're 65 for age 85, we have to make sure that the money's there. Now, I get a little bit queasy when you start talking about taking the money and putting it into infrastructure, because we've seen all kinds of infrastructure projects. The money goes to somebody who gives it to his brother-in-law, the construction engineer. He's got a construction company. We've seen this in Africa, in certain countries, developing countries where there are dictatorships and not much control. So does this concern you that the government's, is this kind of one of the underlying hesitancies of the US Treasury, that they'll get into a situation where the country will become even more fiscally irresponsible? I think our country, I'm talking to you from a position of thinking and being able to demonstrate with comprehensive description of our fiscal gap that our country is insolvent on a long-term basis. Now, would this actually make it less, we have a way to guarantee this doesn't make it more insolvent?
I wish I could give US Treasury a free pass by saying that was their concern, right? In a couple of cases, the administration people around the table didn't even get it. That to me was frightening, right? The funny thing is the Brazilians got it immediately. And I went running to the IMF and the World Bank saying, if this becomes successful, you need an independent third-party monitor who's actually going to make sure that there's not excessive, issuance that a third future government has to pick up. Actually, Chang Yong Reeve, who's the governor of the Central Bank of Korea, and I met at the end of one of the IMF meetings. And he had a brilliant idea, because Korea has a very interesting debt structure, right? They can't just issue debt without permission. So he said, why don't we ring fence these monies and then make sure that how they're invested is sort of tracked closely? And actually, that's a brilliant way to, prevent what you've talked about happen to Social Security trust fund monies as well, right?
So
So
they
you
could be
come up with
invested
smart mechanisms.
They could be invested like in a global index. So of stocks and bonds, fully run by my laptop, not by anybody on Wall Street, because it's all market weighted. But let's move, Kathleen, to the innovations you made while Lieutenant Governor.
No, these weren't when I was Lieutenant Governor. This has happened in the last, when I was Lieutenant Governor, I focused on crime and other things.
By the way, you made a huge reduction in crime in Maryland, Baltimore, I take it. Like 30% I saw in your bio. That's enormous.
Yes.
Has it gone back up, or has this been a permanent?
No. It has gone back up. It went back up, but it went down because we had a special strategy to make it go down, which I'm happy to describe, but that's probably not what you have.
We'll do another podcast on that.
Yeah.
Love to.
Yeah, no, it's actually quite successful. Anyway, no, in the last 10 years, along with Ken Melman, who used to be head of the Republican Party, we founded a center at Georgetown to help states put in something called, we call it Maryland Saves, Oregon Saves, Cal Saves, which basically requires all businesses that don't have a retirement plan to put 5% of their employees' money into a state-run IRA unless the employee objects. And on the average, the Pew Foundation has found that about 70% of the employees put that 5% into the state-run IRA. And 3 states have really gotten it up and running quite well at the moment: California, Oregon, and Illinois. Others are getting up there: Connecticut, Maryland, etc. And so over $1 billion has been collected, which means, and the median income of the people who are doing this is $39,000 a year. So these are people who are not exactly very well off, but they know that they really do want to save for retirement. And different states invest in different ways. They usually have a couple of choices. And the point of this is, what we're doing in Maryland is that we hope that when they do retire, we will help them continue to invest, and that we'll figure out a way to provide a certain amount of money per year for how they, so that they have, maybe if they have $25,000 or $30,000 and you think they're going to live for 20 years, we'll give them a little money each year, so they don't have to think about how much they should spend each year.
So this is a bit like the kind of a Singapore Provident Fund at a lower scale.
Yes, that's a nice way of putting it. And I think that this, the advantage of these state-run, basically IRAs, is that the money is invested. The people who invested are Wall Street firms, State Street, places like that. And it's a diversified fund, and they can make money. I mean, obviously the stock market's done, maybe today not so well, but the last few months quite well. And that means these people who had never been able to retire, have any thought of how to invest before, now have something in their pocket. What a number of states did, Maryland did this, tried to put the first $1,000 into an emergency fund, so that, as you probably have seen the research, if you have an emergency fund and a retirement fund, you don't use the retirement fund for emergencies, because psychologically you understand there are 2 different pots of money. And it also means you actually do have an emergency fund, so that you do have some money when your car breaks down or your washer breaks down or something is needed. So we've also tried to make sure that people have that emergency fund. A secure point too is also, as you know, trying to encourage businesses to help their employees set up an emergency fund.
Yeah, secure point 2 is 2.0 is a law passed by Congress and signed by the president that is kind of reform of some aspects of a private retirement account policy. But go ahead, Arun.
I was going to add one other thing, and Kathleen and I have discussed this at length. What's nice about selfies is it doesn't have to come from US Treasury alone. It could come from actually state level treasuries, right? And in fact, the idea that I just dropped in her lap, as well as Commissioner Martin O'Malley's, is sadly, you had the accident of the ship knocking down this bridge, which affects the state of Maryland dramatically, but the whole country too. In the context of having to raise money to build that up and build up all the infrastructure and all of that, this is where an idea like selfies becomes very attractive, because you create a new innovation for long-term funding. And this is where the Brazilians were so creative, is once we dropped the idea in their lap, they took it to the next level. That's what you're hoping something like this happens either in a Maryland or some other state that actually has, in fact, we recommended this for Turkey right after the earthquake, right? Where do you get earthquake relief from? You're going to need long-term funds. You don't want to borrow from the World Bank because you're borrowing in dollars. This is local currency funding. And, the nice thing with having this instrument is it makes it portable, which is one of the challenges with the state-run plans, is like my 529. Mine is set up in New York. My kids are in Virginia. It's complicated. And I think that's why originally the idea was, why can't we have a national level, IRA? But because that never worked, Kathleen very smartly got a whole bunch of these state level ones up and running. And now there's talk, Kathleen, of a national level plan as well, right, in Congress?
Well, what's interesting now, a number of the states, because they're small states like Delaware, Maine, are working with Colorado. So the states are joining together, so that they're saying, why don't we have the advantage of scale? And so they're if the federal government's not going to work, the states are doing it. And in Delaware, it was unanimously passed, all Republicans, all Democrats, because the Republicans understood, if you do not have a way to save, for young people to save, they're going to be on the dole or they're going to be homeless. So get people to start saving as soon as possible.
This, by the way, sounds very similar to my Social Security reform proposal, but let's move us around to that issue. Arun, tell us about how you view Social Security solvency, and well, let me just say how the trustees of Social Security view it. If you go to table 6F1, March 31st, I don't know whether the new trustees report is out yet, but the last year, March 31st last year, there's a table, Roman 6F1. It says that if you look at the long-term fiscal gap in Social Security, just that system, you look at all the receipts as projected by the Social Security actuaries and all the, which are a positive thing, and all the promised committed outlays that they're projecting, kind of a negative thing. You see that the system in present value, the expenditures minus the receipts in present value equal 65.9 trillion in the red. So that's the official debt's about 24 trillion or so, somewhere in that range. Depending on if you think about debt in the hands of the Fed, not gross debt, but debt after the Fed has printed up money and bought some of the stuff back. So we're talking about 2.5 times the official debt is the unfunded liability of Social Security. I'm not sure they're measuring it correctly, to tell you the truth, but in terms of the financial valuation. But Arun, speak to what you think we should do with Social Security.
So interestingly enough, the model that Franco and I recommended, based on the fight that we had with the World Bank, was a DB is nothing more than a DC with a guaranteed return, right? That was sort of my aha moment in 1998 at this conference in China. There's only one difference between DB and DC. In a DB, your return is guaranteed. In a DC, it isn't. There's no other difference, right? We can say contributions are guaranteed and all of that, but that's actually not true. So then we said, why don't, the problem with Social Security was not DB, right? And for the World Bank to flip to DC made no sense. All we said is, let's convert it into a partially funded system. And, Franco was having this fight with Alicia Manel, who was saying we don't need to do anything because she wanted to keep it as pay-as-you-go. And we said pay-as-you-go is a highly unstable system because—
Alicia, by the way, is a professor of economics at Boston College and runs the Retirement Research Center there.
Correct.
Old friend of mine. Not that we all always agree, but
a very influential voice, right? A very influential voice. And we were just arguing with her that pay-as-you-go as a system of funding Social Security makes it very sort of itchy to small changes in demography or whatever. So your contributions are highly volatile, which from the principles of managing a second pillar DB is a terrible thing to have. You don't want a lot of contribution volatility. So all we said is, listen, what Social Security should do is increase your taxes, kind of like what Greenspan did to create a trust fund, invest those assets in a simple 60-40 passive portfolio, because Alan Greenspan even told us it's hard to even find an independent body in Washington, D.C. And we said, it would earn 5% real. And this was our forecast back in 1999 or thereabouts. And if I run the numbers, and actually Steve Goss ran our simulation and actually would have worked out brilliantly, right? So today, because they've done nothing, it's, the trust fund runs out 12 years earlier than when we started working on it. So We can still do the same thing, but now what's going to happen is everybody's contributions are going to have to go up by 2% permanently, as opposed to, going up to 17%
No,
from
to get rid of
12.4.
the 2% is it's 4.5% percentage points. If you look at the infinite horizon, the full untruncated liability, the 65.9 trillion. Yeah, so we're talking about twice. We have a problem today in terms of Social Security's funding, which is twice as big as under Greenspan. Greenspan's commission, Democrats, Republicans, Senator Moynihan was on that. They did too little, too late. They operated on like half the tumor, and now the tumor is twice as big, or maybe twice as big as they started.
Right.
And now the likelihood is, because they keep focusing on numbers that are convenient, that are not the big picture, truncated numbers, that they'll again operate on half the tumor, and will end up killing the patient.
Yeah, and essentially what we were saying.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just close the thought with 1 second, and then I'll turn it to Kathleen. The monies are sitting at Treasury earning a fake 3% return, right, for last year in the trustees' report. Whereas if they had invested in the stock bond portfolio that we talk about, you're getting 5% real over a 25-year period. This is enormous difference.
What percentage of the money in Social Security would you invest?
The whole amount, whatever's in the trust fund, but you're going to have to get more to make it stable, right? So this is the challenge. Now, you could go global. You could do a lot of creative things, like the Japanese pension system does international investments. So this is not rocket science, right? But there's got to be political will for somebody to say, yes, it works. And we got Steve Goss, who's the chief actuary, to run the numbers back then, and I'm sure he can run it again today, and it'll still work. It's a simple 3-page solution that I've written up, Kathleen, to your comment. It can't be too long, otherwise nobody's going to read it, right? So there is still the possibility to save Social Security if somebody acts now, because the longer you delay, the higher the cost as you bring up ladder, right?
And Kathleen, I take it that part of your solution for Social Security is get more tax revenue from the rich to help cover the.
That is part of my solution, and I wouldn't put all of it into a 60-40. I put 20%. I would put some of it. I think putting all of it, I don't think there's the political will to do that. I think at this point, I think that would be very difficult. I think you have to be realistic about what you can actually do.
If you do that, Kathleen, then you just have to raise the extra tax on everybody. It's just a simple trade-off. Either you put it in contributions, or you get it from.
Just saying you have to do the political will. I just don't think you have it.
But then you have to give people the trade-off. You can say, if you don't put it in a 60.
Let me put on my economist hat here for a second.
Arun, I'm not going to get into argument with you in front of the audience. I'll do this offline. Okay,
that's fine. So let me give you under all these things, we have a problem. So somebody gets hurt. There's no. So my view is that we have so many problems: healthcare, the inequality, the fiscal system being completely bizarre, out of control, locking the poor into poverty. Where on the one hand, we're have all these programs to help the poor, but then we say, if you earn too much money, gee, you lose your SSI, your supplemental security income, your TANF benefits, your food stamp benefits, either completely or Medicaid for your kids, Medicaid for you. So we have we're locking the poor into poverty. So we have to fix things, not just like one thing at a time. I mean, Social Security's solution has to be part of 5 or 6 major reforms that are done. We need a new deal, in effect, is my view. But if you just ask me if we did these other things to make our fiscal system equitable, so that we get the rich to pay their fair share, but also give everybody, including the rich, better incentives to work, and not lock the poor into poverty, because there's ways to do that. What I would say, Social Security by itself as part of a bigger set of programs, I would say what we need to do is have everybody contribute, basically shut down the old system, Social Security, the current system, pay off all the accrued benefits by filling zeros into people's earnings records. So when you retire, you get exactly what you have accrued up to this point. If you're already retired, getting benefits, nothing happens to you. So this is going to phase out the old system, and then we put in a brand new system that Bismarck might have proposed if he were to start from scratch. And the idea would be, it's pretty much Kathleen's proposal, which is everybody contributes 10% of their pay to the personal security account. And before that money goes into their account, it's divided 50-50 between their spouse and their legal partner, so that anybody staying at home to watch kids is fully, vested in the system. It's not that one person does better than the other if they get divorced. So divorce is so high that you have to equalize the size of accounts. And then the government would make matching contributions progressive on behalf of the poor, the unemployed, and the disabled. So now everybody's in this, there has a personal security account. It's all invested collectively by my laptop in the global market of stocks, bonds, real estate, investment trusts. And the government would give a guarantee of a zero real return on this global portfolio, so that when you hit retirement age, your cohort, everybody in your cohort, all their money would be gradually sold off over 10 years and invested into tips. And those tips would be used to pay inflation protected pensions that are proportional to how much you showed up with at the time of the conversion. Very simple idea. It's very much the Singapore proposal. It's very much Kathleen's proposal. It's what your proposal, because it's getting money into the market and hoping that this market is safe over the long term. We can't guarantee that. We know that there is a big equity premium between the return on, for example, stocks and tips. So, the story is that the financial markets are risky, but if you're invested in a diversified with, most of the financial assets out there are bonds.
Over a long period of time, it should go up.
Yeah, we would hope.
That's
That's
the idea. I mean, obviously, go ahead.
That would be what I would propose in the context of other major reforms that would, produce equity and less inequality and give people incentives to work. I mean, locking the poor generation after generation into poverty is just the worst possible thing I think you could do. Hey, we're going to give you this, you're poor, but you're earning an extra penny too much, you're going to lose it all. Or you're going to lose 50 cents or 80 cents on the dollar. So anyway, I think we've covered a lot of ground. And
well, that was a very interesting proposal. Thank you for sharing.
Okay. Well, I've had it, and it's not just mine. I developed this with Jeff Sachs. I need to give my old friend Jeff credit for this. Jeff's a fabulous economist. We don't agree on all things political, but we're close friends. And he and I sat down at some point and says, well, how would we, like in the 80s, we said, how should we fix this? And let's come up with a plan and see if we can get other economists to sign on. We had 150, about 6 Nobel Prize winners. I don't know whether Franco was one of the signatures, but people like Ken Arrow, one of the top all-time economists, maybe the 6th or 7th best economist ever, going back to Adam Smith. He was a signatory, and that idea has been out there, but of course, just being academics, you don't get too much attention. But anyway, I want to thank you so much. Kathleen, we're going to definitely have you back on to talk about crime and how to fight it. Okay, it's a big issue for this election.
Thank you.
And Arun, we'll have you back on to tell us about how this selfies proposal, which is called something different in Brazil. What's it called in Brazil? It's not called
randomized, which is retirement income extra. And actually, at some point, if you're interested, they're doing some phenomenal stuff on gender equity and what I call demographic infrastructure. So we could do that some other time using these instruments. It's really fascinating. Yeah,
Well,
the Global South is leading. It's amazing.
we're having 1 or 2 podcasts coming out a week. Fascinating conversations with you two and other people. So please, if you're interested if you hear this through Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you want to get a free subscription, just send me an email, kotlikov@gmail.com, lifetime free subscription. And this is meant to be economic education, for just a higher level discussion. And that's why I went into economics, which was to try and think about improving policy to help people, to help everybody, really to help society. So I'm fulfilling my dream. Thank you for helping me do that. So
Well,
appreciate
good luck. Thank you.
it.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
us
so
on.
much. Thank you
Totally
so much.
appreciate it.
Lovely to
Take good care.
take care.